Afterlife with Archie Volume 2, Dear Betty, written by Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa and art by Francesco Francavilla. Alright, I hope you all enjoyed Afterlife with Archie Volume 1. Now we will see what Volume 2, Betty, R.I.P, has in store for us. Now, one thing you need to know before we dive into this volume is that this series suffered horrible delays. So we started to see issues coming out 4, 5, 6, 7 months after the previous issue. One issue came out a year after the previous issue. And eventually, the writer and artist kind of moved on to other projects. Not that the book wasn't selling well. It was selling well, and it was critically acclaimed. But eventually, the writer, he got a job writing the Riverdale TV show, and he just didn't have time to devote to Afterlife with Archie. And it's unfortunate because that means Afterlife with Archie does not have a conclusion. So everything's kind of just left hanging, which sucks. The writer and artist did say that they hoped to one day return and finish up the series, but issue 10 came out in 2016 and now it's 2020 and we don't have another issue yet, so it's hard to say if they will ever get around to it. But we have 5 more issues, so let's see what goes down in them. The first issue is going to deal with Sabrina, and I gotta say, it's a little confusing, it's a little bit trippy and weird. It marries the Archie universe with the universe of H.P. Lovecraft, a very popular horror writer, so that's really fun, but it's trippy and weird and confusing, so bear with it. Then we have some pretty fun stuff with the Archie crew once again, and in the last issue, we will check in with Josie and the Pussycats and learn their new twisted backstory, so pretty fun stuff in this volume. Let's dive into Volume 2, Betty, R.I.P. Issue 6, Betty, R.I.P., Chapter 1, Witch in the Dream House. Now, we haven't seen Sabrina since Issue 1, when her aunts, Hilda and Zelda, sent her away as punishment for raising the dead. They sent her to some place called the Netherrealm. Now, Sabrina is explaining a recurring dream she has to someone, we don't know who yet. In her dream, we see Sabrina. She's on a beach. She is with her mortal boyfriend, Harvey Kinkle, who is unaware of her being a witch. Harvey suggests they go scuba diving, so they go out on a boat out to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And we see the name of the boat is the Rayleigh. Rayleigh is the name of a fictional lost city that was first documented in the H.P. Lovecraft short story called The Call of Cthulhu, first published in Weird Tales in June 1928. Rayleigh is a sunken city in the ocean and the prison of the entity called Cthulhu. We are going to see lots of H.P. Lovecraft references throughout this issue. Sabrina, she's looking at the captain of their ship, and she sees something inhuman, and she is confused. When she blinks, the captain appears normal again. He just looks like a sweet fisherman. Harvey and Sabrina, they go swimming underwater, swimming along this beautiful ancient coral reef. And as she is swimming, Sabrina is wondering, shouldn't we have oxygen tanks? But whatever, it's a dream, and she seemed to be breathing fine, so she just let herself enjoy the cool vastness. Until, all of a sudden, she loses sight of Harvey. They somehow became separated. And her lungs, they started burning, and she really had to breathe. So she started kicking as fast as she could, swimming up to the surface. And all of a sudden, some tentacles wrapped around her legs and pulled her further and further into the deep. They were pulling her towards something worse than death, older than death. Sabrina is now out of her dream and she is awake, and she is trapped in some sort of Lovecraftian mental institution, it appears. And she is talking to a man who seems like he is maybe a psychiatrist or a doctor, and the man is drawn to resemble horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. Sabrina also refers to him as Dr. Lovecraft. Sabrina was telling this Dr. Lovecraft all about her dream with the tentacles and being on the beach, and she's been having this dream a lot lately, and it's recurring. And then when she wakes up from the dream, she can't return back to sleep. She just lies in bed, listening to this otherworldly violin music. Lovecraft says, "Ah, yes, that is Eric Zahn, another young patient of mine." This Eric Zahn, he is another Lovecraftian character. He comes from Lovecraft's 1922 short story titled The Music of Eric Zahn. In the story, Eric, he's an elderly musician whose unique and unworldly melodies draw the curiosity of a young university student. So this character is clearly a reference to this other character from Lovecraft's book. Sabrina and Dr. Lovecraft finish up their session, and Sabrina asks, "You haven't heard from my aunts, have you?" And Lovecraft answers, "Sabrina, you know that's not possible. Your aunts are dead, and you have to accept that." Sabrina replies, "I was just double checking." And Lovecraft tells her, "Remember what we agreed. It's alright for you to tell me your delusions about witches and nether realms and books of the dead, but I don't want you spreading that hysteria around the Institute." Sabrina leaves. So right now, we might be a little bit confused. Where the hell is Sabrina? What is this weird institute she is in? What is the deal with her weird dreams? Why is Dr. Lovecraft here in the flesh? Is she in the nether realm? Is she somewhere else? Are her aunts dead now? Why is nothing like it seems? Anyway, let's continue on with Sabrina's journey through this institute. The next day, Sabrina, she is thinking to herself, "Every day I'm here, I'm getting more and more insane." Sabrina, she is taking part in some sort of group with other patients where they talk, and the man who is running the group works with Dr. Lovecraft. His name is Dr. Macan, which is a reference to another old horror writer. The doctor asks Sabrina to tell the group her story. Now Sabrina, thinking to herself, says, "My name is Sabrina Spellman, but everyone keeps telling me my last name is Sawyer. I was 16, and my aunts dropped the bombshell that I was a witch, and I came from a family of witches. But according to Dr. Lovecraft, that's apparently a fiction that I've created to cope with my reality. Last thing I remember was stealing the Necronomicon to bring Hot Dog back from the dead, and then my aunts banishing me to the Netherrealm, unless that's just a dream I had. Dr. Lovecraft, he's telling me that my house burned down and my aunts were in it when it happened, and they died and I almost died." Sabrina, she can't tell anymore. Her mind's getting all twisted. She wonders if she died and now she's in limbo or something. But she tells the group doctor, Dr. Macan, that she's having trouble figuring out what's real and what's her imagination. Dr. Macan tells her, "Don't fret about that, Sabrina. We'll help you sort through all that one day at a time for however long it takes." After group, Sabrina, she's meditating outside, and she is greeted by a fellow patient named Eric Zahn, the violinist we heard about earlier. Eric, he knows something is up, and everything is not what it seems. He tells Sabrina, "He's testing you. All of us. Lovecraft is trying to figure out which one of us is strongest, not just our powers, but our, sanity." And Sabrina asks him, "You're Eric, right? I hear your violin at night." And Eric apologizes for his playing. He tells Sabrina that he'd stop if he could, but his music is the only thing that keeps them from coming through. The word them is bolded. We don't know who the them he is referring to is. Sabrina says that, "Oh no, she doesn't mind his music, it's kind of cool." And Eric explains that they hate it. It's like nails on a chalkboard to them. As Eric goes to leave, he tells Sabrina, "Can I tell you a secret, Sabrina, whatever your last name is? Lovecraft, he's not a doctor. He's a procurer. He procures for them. And Godzilla from the movies, he's one of them. One of the elder gods. Yig? Same with the creature from the Black Lagoon. He's a Dagon." Sabrina tells Eric, "Okay, back off, you weirdo." He's saying all this weird shit to Sabrina, and it's freaking her out. Eric leaves and tells her, "You have no idea what's going on here. If you are what they say you are, you actually have a fighting chance. Stop taking their meds and figure out a way to escape. Sabrina, back in the institution in her room, she palms her pills on Eric's suggestion, and she doesn't take them. And Sabrina, she sees images of Jughead with hot dog, and then Jughead turning into a zombie, as well as all of Riverdale being zombies, and she wakes up screaming, just another bad dream. Now normally when she wakes up in the middle of the night, she usually hears this Eric's violin playing. Eric said that his violin playing was the only thing that keeps them from coming through. Well, Sabrina hears no violin playing this night, so she grows concerned. She sneaks over to this Eric's room to check in on him. Eric, unhinged, tells her, "My fingers, Sabrina. Lovecraft cut off my fingers, so I couldn't play anymore." Sabrina, shocked, says, "What?" And Eric continues, "It's in here with me, Sabrina. I think it wants me to go with it. Oh God, I think it's smiling." Sabrina, she's gonna try to break through this door and see what's going on with this Eric, but then all of a sudden the door just opens for Sabrina. Sabrina walks in, and this Eric is gone. The window is cracked open, just enough as if to let something in. Later on, Sabrina confronts this Dr. Lovecraft and Dr. Macon about Eric's accusations that his fingers were cut off and the fact that he's missing now. Lovecraft explains, though, Eric was a deeply disturbed boy beyond our help. He tried to take his own life last night. That's why we transferred him to a facility more tailored to his specific needs. Lovecraft asks Sabrina, "Are you certain you weren't dreaming? Imagining whatever it was you believe you heard?" Sabrina fires back, "I grew up in a strange house, Doctor, so fair warning, if you're trying to trick me, I know a few tricks myself." And Sabrina storms off. Later on, Sabrina, now in full detective mode, full I need to figure out what the hell is going on mode, she talks to one of Eric's friends, a boy named Richard Pickman. Richard is once again another Lovecraft character. He is from the 1927 short story called Pickman's Model. In the short story, Richard, he creates these horrifying images, and his works are brilliantly executed, but so graphic that he ends up being shunned from all of his fellow artists. Sabrina asks him, "Hey you, Picasso, if you know what happened to your friend Eric, you need to tell me everything right the hell now." Richard, he introduces himself, and he tells Sabrina, "I can tell you what I know, but maybe it's better to show you in my studio." So he leads Sabrina to his painting studio and shows all these graphic, horrific paintings. He explains, they're the beasts in the caves, the things on the doorstep, the colors out of space, the haunters in the dark, the lords of Carcosa. And Sabrina asks, "You painted all these?" And Richard explains, "That's my gift. That's why Lovecraft chose me. I paint. Eric played the violin. What's your special skill? You must have one, or else you wouldn't be here." And Sabrina says, "Spellcasting. Used to be, at least. What do these monsters have to do with Eric?" And Richard explains, "They took him last night, and they're gods, not monsters. Old gods, like pre-Bible gods. Lovecraft's using us to bring them back." Sabrina, confused, asks, "Gods?" Richard says, "Lovecraft, he thought he could control them. That's what he was using Eric's music for. But I think Lovecraft gets it now. That the best Lovecraft and Macon can do is serve them, keep the gods happy, prepare the way for them. These portraits will hang in the Church of Lovecraft's building for them. Macon says I can be their Michelangelo, that if I make myself useful to them." And Sabrina's like, whoa, hold up here. What church? So Richard leads her to the supposed church, and he says, okay, so maybe it's more like a temple. And we see the beginning of this building, of this weird doorway leading out to a cliff overlooking the ocean. Sabrina says, "Is this what all the other patients do all day? Hammer away at some crazy thing?" And Richard explains, Dr. Lovecraft says everyone has a role to play. Just then, Lovecraft and this Macon arrive. Lovecraft asks, hello children, weren't planning anything naughty, were you? And Macon announces, it's time, Richard. He's made his choice, praise him. Sound the trumpet, make sure everyone's ready and gathered. Sabrina yells for them to stay away. She'll use her magic to turn them into frogs or something. Lovecraft, he's not worried. The pills she's been taking this whole time were magic inhibitors. Macon blows some mist into Sabrina's face and Sabrina passes out for a bit. When Sabrina wakes up, she's been dressed in white. Her hands are tied in a rope that is hexed and keeps her from casting spells. She asks Lovecraft how he found her in the Netherrealm. And Lovecraft answers, in which limbo you mean? Oh, why, the old gods told me, of course. And Sabrina asks about her friends back in Riverdale. And Macon answers, oh, they're all dead, of course. And Sabrina, she is tied near the edge of the steep cliff, on the site of what will one day be their temple. Lovecraft and Macon are leading the others in a chant. Sabrina assumes that they are going to burn her, like how witches were burned in the past. They're going to sacrifice her. And Lovecraft tells Sabrina, oh Sabrina, Eric was the sacrifice. You're being exalted. Sabrina is still confused and she is scared and she is wondering what is going to happen here. And Lovecraft eventually announces, all hail Sabrina Spellman, Queen of Carcosa, Bride of Cthulhu. And we see this 2-page spread of this horrific, ginormous looking monster Cthulhu with tentacles and wings. And apparently Sabrina is now this creature's bride. Cthulhu is arguably H.P. Lovecraft's most popular character. The creature is a gigantic entity worshipped by cultists in the shape of like an octopus, a dragon, and a caricature of a human form. Sabrina narrates, I'm like a butterfly in front of a mountain. I'm crying, but it doesn't care. I think of Harvey, I think of his goofy smile from that last dream I had, when I said to myself, oh wow, I'm gonna marry this boy, and be happy for the rest of my life. But after that, Sabrina's narration boxes change from yellow to black, as she becomes possessed by this Cthulhu, and then Sabrina now narrates, and then the stars were right again, and what an age-old cult had failed to do by design, a young witch had done by accident. After vintillions of years, great Cthulhu was loose again, and ravening for delight. Issue 7, Betty R.I.P. Chapter 2, Dear Diary. This issue starts with a flashback to when Betty was 12 years old and her parents gave her a diary. Her mom is Alice Cooper and her dad is Hal Cooper. And off to the side we see Betty's older sister, Polly Cooper, who feels like a little bit of an outcast and always was a little bit angry. Well, Betty, she loved this diary and she documented everything that happened to her in her life. In her diary, she writes about making friends with new student at the time, Veronica Lodge. Veronica was the richest, most beautiful girl in junior high. And Betty was happy to be Veronica's friend. But as their friendship grew, Veronica showed that she was kind of a mean girl. She talked Betty out of attending Ethel Mugg's birthday party one year, saying, oh, that would be committing social suicide if you went to that. Just forget the party and come over to my house and we'll have Smithers give us mani-pedis. One day, Archie and his family moved in next door, and Archie and Betty's rooms were right across from each other, and they were friendly with one another. But once Veronica met Archie though, her and Betty kind of became frenemies. Veronica was scheming for ways to get Archie, and Veronica did things like not allow Betty on the cheerleading squad as a way to make Betty seem less cool. Despite Veronica's mean girl bitchiness, when Veronica's mom died, their friendship got renewed and Betty spent some time with Veronica, comforting her, and underneath it all, Betty still feels Veronica is a good person and she would hate to do anything that would upset her. Back in the current day now, since last volume ended, Archie, Betty, and the various Riverdale inhabitants have made their way to the outskirts of town, we see Betty. She is sitting by a lake writing in a new diary. Archie walks over to her and asks her what she's doing, and Betty explains that they couldn't return to her house to get her real diaries before they evacuated town. So, before they all left Veronica's house, Betty got Smithers to give her one of his blank journals, and she's decided to recreate her original diary to try and remember things so she wouldn't forget what life was like before everything went to hell. Archie tells her that's a great idea. He asks if he's in the diary, and Betty laughs, saying, "Are you kidding? You're all over it." The two of them kiss, and they head back to the others. Betty, she explains the group's journey thus far. When they all left Riverdale, finally after 2 days, Archie suggested that the group stop for a funeral, so they gathered pieces of wood and made gravestones and wrote the names of the dead on the wood. The names of all their dead: Jughead, Ethel, Principal Weatherby, Miss Grundy, Moose, Midge, Pop Tate, Archie's dad, Betty's parents, Ginger's parents, Nancy's parents, Chuck and Dilton's parents, Reggie's parents, and many more. They stood in silence for a bit by the graves, and Archie comforted Betty, grabbing her hand. All of a sudden, though, the group was interrupted by a zombie horde led by Jughead. The group believed that Jughead was their leader, being Patient Zero, and they specifically were trying to take Jughead out, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer zombie force, and they were forced to flee. The group eventually got away. Now, at the end of their first week since being on the run, it became clear whatever this zombie plague was, it was spreading. The zombies were everywhere, around the whole world it seemed. It all seemed so fast. How was that possible? Dilton explains his analysis of the zombie apocalypse situation. He says, well, the bubonic plague killed 75 million people in 3 years. Humans have only ever eradicated 2 infectious diseases: cattle plague and smallpox. Based on what we know, a single person, Jughead, infected 20 people on the first night. By the end of day 2, those 20 people might have infected, say, 562 people. By day 3, it could be 9,672 people. And by the end of week 1, it could be over 200,000 people. Everyone finds the situation all super scary. Their plan is to keep moving ahead and try to make their way to the CDC in Pittsburgh. So they all kept walking, always on country roads, following highways, but never on the highways themselves. When they saw a horde of zombies, they hid from them. If they came across other people, other survivors, they hid from them as well. It was too risky to assume other people were good and decent and meant no harm. As it got colder, they stopped off at a store to stock up on warmer clothing. At a campfire one night, Cheryl asks, "Where's Sabrina? Doesn't she usually show up and wiggle her nose or whatever and make everything go back to normal? Isn't that what usually happens in these kind of stories?" Cheryl, Nancy, Ginger, and Chuck all share stories of a dream they had of Sabrina recently. In the dream, Sabrina was drowning, fighting an octopus, having dinner, sitting in a banquet table with these inhuman monsters. Dilton calls this shared dream experience dream meshing. Anyway, they walk on. They walked for several weeks. Betty and Archie over this time managed to form a relationship. They kept it secret from Veronica, though. They didn't want Veronica to know and overreact, as she is prone to doing when it comes to Archie. Mr. Lodge decided that the group should stop. It was Thanksgiving, and it's important that they keep up their traditions. So, they will all have a mini celebration. Mr. Lodge took Smithers, Kevin, and Ginger into the forest to look for something to eat for their Thanksgiving celebration. Also, Cheryl and Jason Blossom went out as well into the forest to hunt for some food on their own. Now, Cheryl Blossom, she remembers a previous Thanksgiving 7 years ago with her family. Their family was discussing what they were thankful for. The father, he was thankful for his perfect, beautiful family. The mother, she was thankful for the gorgeous house they lived in. Jason, He was thankful for his beloved sister Cheryl because it meant he would never be alone and he would always have someone to play with. Cheryl, she was thankful for her pet dog named Sugar because she is such a good puppy and protects her at night from the monsters. Cheryl and her brother, back in the current day now, are walking alone, looking for food. Cheryl, remembering her pet dog Sugar, asks her brother, "Hey, you remember that puppy I had and how much I loved her? You remember? Then remember how she died choking on her own leash?" We see an image of a young little Jason strangling his sister's puppy because he was jealous of all the attention she paid it. Cheryl continues and says, "And no one could quite figure out how that happened? I was inconsolable." And Jason puts his hand on his sister's shoulder and tells her, "Hey, I consoled you the way I always did, the way I always will." Just at that moment, they see a straggling zombie approaching them, and Jason gets ready to kill it. We jump over to Betty. She is writing in her diary and remembers her sister, Polly. Polly had a dark past. She had a boyfriend who beat her, and she would wear makeup to try and hide her beatings, and she would yell at her parents and yell at Betty, till one day Betty came home from hanging out with friends, and Betty's mom told her that Polly was gonna be leaving them for a while. Betty asks, "What? Why?" And Betty's mom explained that your father decided he found a place that will take good care of her. And Betty says, "What kind of place? Is it a school? Where's Polly now, Mom? I'll talk to her." And Betty's mom, crying, says, "It's too late. She's gone. Oh Betty, they took Polly away." So we don't fully know what Polly did or where Polly was sent to, perhaps a jail or a special hospital or a mental institution, but there was clearly some dark history in Betty's sister's past. Veronica goes over to Betty and they discuss Betty's diary keeping. Veronica asks Betty, "Are you writing about Archie in that slam book of yours? About what his lips taste like when he kisses you?" And Betty tells Veronica she needs to check her privilege. Veronica snatches Betty's diary from her hands and she questions, "What does Archie do to you when he finds you? What do you do to him?" Archie now arrives and sees what's going on, and then he tells Veronica that she's crossing a line and she needs to give Betty her book back now. Veronica exclaims, "So I was right. Something is going on between the two of you." She is holding Betty's diary over the fire, threatening to burn it. But in that moment, they are interrupted by Cheryl Blossom staggering back into camp. And Cheryl is covered in blood with a machete in her hands. And she says, "Jason's dead. It was awful. And my name's not Cheryl anymore. It's Blaze." Okay. Everyone in camp thinks that Cheryl just murdered her brother. Also, why the hell does she want to go by the name Blaze now? Apparently in the comics, she used the name Blaze as an alias sometimes. I still think it's weird to kill your brother, or at least potentially kill your brother and be covered in his blood, and come back to camp and say, "By the way, call me this different name now," but okay. Issue 8, Betty R.I.P, Chapter 3, A Ghost Story. The variant cover for this issue is a clear homage to the movie The Shining. I just thought it was interesting to point that out. Last issue, it was Thanksgiving, and now it is Christmas Eve. Archie and crew have made their way to the Bradbury Hotel in Vermont, and are staying here for now to wait out the storm and the snowy weather. Archie is discussing if he thinks Cheryl Blossom killed her brother with a machete. There was always something weird and twincesty about them. Maybe it finally got to be too much and Cheryl killed him? Archie says that Cheryl's story when she got back to camp was that the zombies snuck up on them in the woods and surprised them, and Jason threw himself at the zombies to protect his sister. Archie thinks that story doesn't exactly sound like something Jason Blossom would do. Archie is not sure what to believe. It is revealed that Archie, right now, is talking to the ghost of his dead friend, Jughead, who Archie is imagining as the bartender here in this hotel. Ghost Jughead asks, "So, what happened to Cheryl after she showed up at camp like that?" Archie answers, "Well, we were all frozen. None of us knew what to do until my mom went over to Cheryl and said, 'Let's get you cleaned up.' And she walked Cheryl away." Jughead asks, "Yeah, well, what happened after that?" "Well, after that, Mr. Lodge returned from hunting and was told about Cheryl, and he was immediately angry and thought that Cheryl was a murderer, and he didn't want to have a murderer in their midst and wanted her banished from the group." Archie says to Mr. Lodge, "What, and just leave her behind, alone? How long do you think she would last?" And Mr. Lodge replies, "I don't know. Based on her handiness with a machete, quite a while." Archie and Mr. Lodge argued some more. Eventually, they decided that figuring out what to do with Cheryl was too big a decision for any single one of them to make, so Archie proposed they should have a group vote. Well, Cheryl, she waited in the tent, and the rest of them stood in judgment of her. Initially, they were to pass around some index cards and vote anonymously on whether Cheryl should stay or go. But Mr. Lodge, he didn't like the idea of an anonymous vote, and he argued we're jurors in the jury room. Complete transparency is essential at this point. I vote for the safety of our group. I vote we leave Cheryl Blossom to her own devices, and may God have mercy on her soul. Veronica, she stands by her father on this one and says that Cheryl has always been a thorn in our sides. Let's finally pluck it. Smithers says, where the Lodge family goes, I go. So he also votes along with Hiram Lodge and Veronica Lodge. Reggie, on the other hand, he votes that Cheryl should stay. His reasoning is that we've all done some pretty unforgivable shit in our lives. Plus, who knows, it might be us to repopulate the planet. And at this point, Cheryl, or Blaze, could be my best and only shot at getting laid. I vote we keep the freak fast, but put her on a leash. That's sound reasoning to me, man. Betty, she calls Reggie a disgusting pig, but she also votes that Cheryl stays. Chuck and Nancy are the only black people in the group, and Nancy comments on the racism of the situation and says, if it were me or Chuck in Cheryl's place, would there even be a vote? Nevertheless, Nancy votes for Cheryl to go, and she says Chuck votes the same way. Dilton and Ginger both vote that Cheryl stays. So right now, the vote is 4-5, with the kicking Cheryl out party in the lead. Archie asks how Kevin Keller will vote. Kevin says he's abstaining from voting. This pisses Mr. Lodge off. He says, "What, a conscientious objector? No, unacceptable. This isn't Canada. You have to vote." And Kevin argues, "Actually, my dad died in the Gulf War protecting my right to abstain from disputes that have nothing to do with me, so I'll say it again. My beau and I abstain." With Kevin abstaining, the vote stays 4-5. Archie's mom votes that Cheryl stays as well. That leaves Archie being the deciding vote. Mr. Lodge does not like where this is going. Archie votes that Cheryl stays in the group. Archie talking with Ghost Jughead in the present. Jughead tells Archie, "Oh man, Lodge is gonna kill you one of these days, you know that, right?" And Archie responds, "Oh, for sure. But I want to believe in us, Jughead. Maybe I'm naive, but I want to believe we're still Riverdale." And Jughead asks, how has Cheryl been since this all went down? Archie says she's been fine, basically. But when we first got here to the hotel, one night, Cheryl, she gathered all the girls and she wanted to talk with them privately. So Cheryl, she gathered all the women and she tells them, "Look, I know you guys think I'm crazy. I don't want to tell the boys. I don't think I could handle the jokes. And believe me, Reggie would have a field day with this, but I do think you deserve an explanation and hear the truth about me and Jason. Finally, we're gonna find out what the hell has been going on between her and Jason." But nope. Archie explains to Jughead that Betty wouldn't tell him. Betty, she just came back to the room after Cheryl spilled her guts about everything, and Betty was all pale and shocked. And Betty asked Archie, "Do you believe in evil, Archie? Because I'm starting to. I'm really starting to." God damn it, what did Cheryl tell the girls? Or her and her brother banging or what? I need to know. Archie tells Jughead, whatever Cheryl told Betty and the other girls that night, it did something not even the zombies had been able to do. It took away Betty's innocence. It took away her hope. Whatever it was Jason did, it sounds like he deserved what he got. Later on, Archie's talking with his mother. They're discussing Cheryl, and his mom tells him that what happened between Cheryl and Jason would have ended up happening no matter what. In the woods or in Lodge Manor, there was only one way that story was going to end. Archie's mom then tells Archie a crazy story that her grandmother, Archie's great-grandmother, Beatrice, told her when she was a little girl. Mary says that her grandmother told her in the early days of Riverdale during the war, so many young people were dying, and it felt like the promise of Riverdale died with all those deaths. The hope of Riverdale. So one Christmas, there were more children buried up at the cemetery than on the streets caroling. So some townsfolk wondered what could be done about all these deaths. So they decided to visit the Witches of Greendale. So Agnes Cooper, Betty's great-grandmother, Franklin Andrews, Archie's great-grandfather, and Forsyth Jones, Jughead's great-grandfather, all went to Greendale to visit the witches. The witches said that they can make it, so the children of Riverdale will be safe, always, and whatever horrors devour the outside world, your town will remain untouched, preserved. Agnes Cooper asked, "What do you want in return? Because there's always something needed in return, isn't there?" The witches respond, "You'll have to pledge something to us. One child from each of you over the next 3 generations, as tribute to those who will protect you, the Elder Gods, the Lords of Carcosa." Agnes, Franklin, and Forsyth are hesitant. The witches say, Come, what matters? 3 children? That's just one from each of you to safeguard the rest, including any others you might have forever?" Agnes and the others agreed to the witches' bargain. Archie tells his mom, "That's a crazy-ass story, Mom." Mary says, "Well, my grandmother only told it to me once, and when I asked her about the story later, she insisted I was making the whole thing up." However, certain things did happen. Archie's great-uncle Arthur died when he was 13. He fell through some ice and drowned. And then the next generation, Alice Cooper's sister Annie died when she was 14. In a terrible fire down at the roller rink. Now remember, one child from each family over 3 generations. First, the Andrews, then the Coopers, and then lastly, the Joneses. Archie says, and the 3rd generation would be, gulp, my generation. What are you saying? Archie's mom replies, "I'm not saying anything. It's a terrible story to remember at Christmas time. I don't even know why I brought it up." "Yeah, why did you bring that up?" Archie asks, don't you think that Jughead was the 3rd sacrifice? Archie's mom doesn't know. She says, "I think my grandmother, who liked a lot of rum in her eggnog, remember, would say that witches preferred their children younger." Archie, thinking back to that messed up story his mom just told him, and thinking about the ordeal that they all just went through, he walks down the steps to the others who are trying to get warm by a fireplace. And Archie, he sees Betty there, and he walks up to her and he says, "Mary," thinking that he's going to say Merry Christmas, but all of a sudden he just changes his mind and says, "Marry me, Betty, be my wife." And Betty replies, "I thought you were going to say Merry Christmas." And Archie counters, "Oh yeah, that too, Merry Christmas." Ghost Jughead is watching on and cheering on Archie. And Betty says, "You're my everything, Archie. Of course I'll marry you." but not until after my 18th birthday. And Archie says, 3 months from now? Not a problem, Betty. Issue 9, Betty R.I.P. Chapter 4, The Trouble with Reggie. By the way, this issue came out 1 year after issue 8 came out. The series was really getting terrible with its delays at this point. So we see some illustrations of the ways Archie and Reggie are different people. Archie treats the girls in his class with kindness and respect, always offering to carry their books, and Reggie, he obsesses over certain girls in his class and gets angry when they rebuff his advances. Although they sometimes disagree, Archie honors his mother and father, helping them with the chores around the house, whereas Reggie does nothing for his allowance and once got in a fight with his dad after losing a baseball game. When the zombie apocalypse happened, Archie stepped up as leader of the group to protect his friends, even if it meant making some hard choices. Reggie, moving from town to town, he withdrew further into himself, consumed by his darkest secret, that he's personally responsible for the end of the world. Reggie narrating says, everyone is the hero of their own story, and no one thinks of themselves as the villain. Reggie, he tells us a story of himself finding 4 horses in a barn, which he fed and coaxed them back up to strength until they trusted him. And then he rode the horses back to camp, and everyone agreed the horses were a game changer. They can load their provisions on them and make better time. Kevin and Ginger, who are their group's scouts, they could ride ahead for miles and report back in 1 hour instead of 5. Reggie was called a hero, and Mr. Lodge said the horses will make all the difference. And Veronica kissed Reggie on the cheek and said she always knew he would step up and come into his own. The only thing is, though, Reggie did not find those horses. Archie and Betty did. And Reggie watched while everyone else rallied around them, slapping them on the back, congratulating them, while Reggie was on the outside looking in, like he always is. Reggie, he always found himself never fitting in. When he would go to the movies, to a comedy, everyone around him was laughing their asses off, except for him. He wasn't laughing. He was thinking, what is wrong with these people? Why does anyone think this is funny? But then when he would go to a horror movie, the exact opposite would happen. He was the only one laughing, and he would think, this scene with the power drill is hilarious. Why is no one but me getting the joke? Reggie, he is confiding with Kevin Keller, and he's telling Kevin about this one day at school. Him and his bros, Archie, Jughead, and Dilton, they were hanging out in the computer lab, and Dilton found this online quiz called, Are You a Sociopath? And Dilton thought it would be funny to ask the questions to Archie. So question 1 was, are you superficially charming and intelligent? Reggie, thinking about the answers for himself, he thought to himself, well, yeah, I am superficially charming and intelligent. I mean, I call myself Mantle the Magnificent. Question 2, do you have delusions or other signs of irrational thinking? Reggie says, oh no, I actually don't have that. Maybe I'm not a sociopath. But Dilton explains, sociopaths typically answer this question no, as they are often super rational, coldly so. Reggie's like, well shit. Reggie, he's basically answering every question the way a sociopath would. Next question, do you tell lies or say insecure things? Yeah. Are you pathologically egocentric? Yeah. Are you a crazy party friend? Reggie says to himself, my nickname in the 6th grade was the King of Kegers, so my answer to that question would be beer pong. Man, the frickin' 6th grade? The King of Kegers? Next question was, do you generally lack the ability to react emotionally? Reggie, he was kind of worried at the time. Maybe he was a sociopath. I mean, the last time he cried was never. The next question was, are you capable of love? Sociopaths are incapable. To this, Reggie did feel he was capable of love. So maybe he wasn't a sociopath. He loved Midge Clump, the girl that was Moose's girlfriend. She was a goddess to Reggie. She was the last thing he thought about before going to sleep, and the first thing he thought about every morning. And when Midge and Moose would fight, Reggie would often swoop in and give her a ride home and try to find an opportunity to get in with her. The last sociopath question was, do you ever feel remorse or shame? A sociopath never feels guilt. Now, normally Reggie, he wouldn't feel regret, but he did feel regret last year. He explains to Kevin about how he is responsible for the apocalypse. Reggie elaborates further. He says the week of the Halloween dance, Midge texted him to meet her at Pop's diner. When Reggie went to meet Midge, Midge told him that she was in trouble and she needed $500. Reggie asked her what kind of trouble she was in, and why not just talk to Moose about whatever this is? And Midge says, what kind of trouble do you think I'm in, genius? Actually, it's probably not what you're thinking. And me might be nothing, but sorry, I'm just stressed out. No, I'm not gonna tell Moose. He doesn't have any money and I don't want him to know, since it's none of his business and it has nothing to do with him. I'm thinking myself, Midge was probably pregnant and she needed an abortion, but I'm not sure, it's not confirmed. Midge pleads with Reggie that he probably has that kind of money in his sock drawer. The only other person she could ask in town was Veronica, and she really doesn't want to get into this with Veronica. Reggie tells Midge no problem. He'll have the money for her tomorrow. Midge, she's holding Reggie's hand. All of a sudden, Moose arrives at Pop's diner and sees the two of them together. Moose accuses Reggie. What are you doing with my girl, Reggie? Midge gets up and tells Moose it's nothing, we were just talking. And she asks for Moose to take her home. But Moose questions, why is Reggie always trying to make time with you? And Reggie tells Moose he sounds like a goon. Moose grabs Reggie and they have a scuffle. When Reggie was driving home afterwards, he was enraged, and he was driving over a hill and he saw Jughead's dog, Hot Dog, and Reggie says he purposely swerved into Hot Dog. Not swerved out of the way, he swerved into Hot Dog. He says it was the most sickening sound he's ever heard in his life. He pulled over and picked up the dog, but he knew it was too late to do anything for it. So he drove the dog to Jughead's and set him down on the lawn, and he wanted Hot Dog to be home when he died. Reggie telling all this to Kevin Keller. Kevin shakes him and says, Hot Dog died because you killed him? And you killed him for no reason? And Reggie says, I think something's really wrong with me, Kevin. Inside, I think something's missing or broken inside me. Kevin lets go of Reggie and tells him that he's gonna have to tell the others. Reggie wants Kevin to tell the others, though. He says that he wants them to know that he was responsible for this zombie apocalypse. And he doesn't want the group thinking that it was an act of God or something random or something that they did to brought this down on everybody. It was him. Reggie says, I started this mess and only I can end it. Kevin realizes that Reggie is thinking of leaving, which would be suicide. Kevin tries to talk Reggie into coming back to camp with him, but Reggie says he's never going back to camp. Like I said, I told you about Hot Dog so you can tell them for me. Give them my confession, but I can't look them in the eye and tell them who I really am and what I did. Tell them I'm sorry and I'm gonna fix this. Kevin, holding his bow and arrow, aims it at Reggie to get him to stop walking away, but Reggie just tells Kevin, go ahead, I deserve it. Kevin can't go through with it though, so Reggie just continues walking away and tells Kevin, I'll see you on the flip side. Kevin runs back to the others and reports to Archie, Betty, and Veronica Reggie's whole story. Archie, immediately, he wants to go out there and save Reggie and bring him back to camp, but Veronica says Reggie made a choice and we should honor that choice. And Betty says, Archie, he killed Hot Dog. Maybe Veronica's right. We don't need Reggie to be our best man at our wedding. So Betty doesn't want to go after Reggie either. Archie comes to the realization that maybe they are right, and he's struggling to come to terms that Reggie is not the person that he thought he was. Archie just says, damn it, Reggie. Archie asks Kevin to be his best man, and Kevin accepts. They all walk back to camp to meet with the greater group. and they decide to just tell the others that Reggie disappeared. They don't need the others to hear Reggie's whole horrible story. Now we see Reggie. He's walking on. His plan was to walk toward the horde of zombies that are after him and his friends, and have the zombies devour and kill him. Since Reggie started this, once he is dead, he figures once the original crime has been punished, maybe the zombies will stop chasing Archie and everybody else. But when Reggie reaches the zombie horde, they don't touch him, like Reggie himself is the one who's diseased. Reggie, he keeps walking through the horde of zombies. He walks all the way to eventually see Jughead in the middle. And Reggie thinks, okay, this makes sense. Jughead has to kill me. That makes the most poetic sense. I killed his dog. He has to kill me. Jughead, though, steps aside, revealing his dog, Hot Dog. And Reggie feels like, alright, Hot Dog has to kill me. So he kneels before Hot Dog and says, let this be the end of it. All of a sudden, Reggie hears a voice saying, Hot Dog, heal. Reggie wonders, who is behind this voice? It is Sabrina, who appears to be fully possessed and controlled by Cthulhu. She has tentacles behind her, and Sabrina says, Reggie Mantle, our Prince of Darkness. You've played your part so very well. It was meant to end here, but our master is not without mercy. Our master rewards those who serve him, and he has something for you, Reggie. And Reggie says, I don't want anything. I just want this to be over. And Sabrina continues, that's not true. There is one thing you still crave in that twisted little heart of yours. And we see Midge Clump in zombie form. And Reggie says, Midge? And Sabrina continues, we'd make her whole again, and then she'd be yours, Reggie. She'd do whatever you want. More importantly, you'd be able to do whatever you want to her. And Reggie says, yes, please, yes. Sabrina tells Reggie, you just have to do one last thing for us. One tiny thing. And Reggie says, yes, God, anything. Sabrina tells him, you need to go back to your friends. You need to beg for forgiveness. And then you need to kill their hope. You need to kill Betty Cooper, Reggie. And then Midge will be yours forever. Reggie, thinking about this proposal, envisions him riding a horse with Midge beside him. Sabrina continues, say yes, Prince Reggie, and Midge Clump shall be yours. And Reggie, he says, kill Betty Cooper? Sure, why not? Issue 10, Betty R.I.P, Chapter 5, Interview/Interlude with the Pussycats. In this issue, we will learn about Josie and the Pussycats. They are typically a popular girl band from the town of Riverdale, although in Afterlife with Archie, they put a spooky twist on their origin and gives them a much more complicated backstory. This is obviously not the typical Josie and the Pussycats origin story, but it's a fun little direction. So we see the lead singer of the Pussycats, Josie McCoy. She has given an interview to a Mr. Blankenship. Josie asks, where would you like to begin? Mr. Blankenship says, how about with when you were born? And Josie replies, sure, why not? The beginning. According to my birth certificate, I was born in 1906. And the interviewer, he's smiling. He doesn't believe this. He says, well, I mean, look at you, Miss McCoy. You can't be older than what, 17, 18? If you were born in 1906 and you still look like a mouseketeer, what's your secret? And Josie says, lots of sunblock. Also, I never drink alcohol. The interviewer continues, Miss McCoy, you and the Pussycats went from being a high school garage band to being mega stars. You've just dropped a new album, you're about to launch a world tour, and you're playing the Super Bowl this year. The public devours your songs, you outsell Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, Adele. But for all that success, in this age of information overload, we know next to nothing about your private lives. The interviewer continues, Now, you requested this interview. Your manager promised me full transparency, full access. And Josie says, and you shall receive it. You asked me when I was born. I'm telling you it was 1906. So Josie is going to tell the interviewer her true origin story. Josie's mother got pregnant, and her father took off before Josie was even born. Josie, she was born in an alleyway on the way to the hospital, and her mother died 6 minutes after Josie was born. Josie was taken to an orphanage and left on the steps. The orphanage was run by a real monster. Her name was Alexander Cabot. Alexander Cabot is typically a rival to Josie and the Pussycats in the typical Pussycat stories, but in this version, she appears to be the woman who ran the orphanage that ended up taking Josie in. Josie, she shared a room with 3 other girls. Melody Valentine, she is typically the Pussycats' drummer. Valerie Brown, she is usually the bass player and songwriter. And Pepper Smith, she is typically not a member of Josie and the Pussycats. She's usually just Josie's bookwormish friend. Now, over their years together living in the orphanage, the 4 girls, they grew to be a family. And they grew older, and they discovered that they all shared a mutual love of singing. The mean Alexander Cabot, though, she tried to beat the singing out of the girls because she resented them for it. Until eventually one day, one of Alexander's deadbeat boyfriends, a guy named Buddy, he overheard the girls singing and realized that maybe there might be some money he can make off those girls. The girls referred to this guy as Uncle Buddy. Uncle Buddy, he bought the girls costumes and taught them dance routines, and he called them the Cabot Sisters. And he started booking them on the vaudeville circuit at little towns across the country. The girls, they would perform for rowdy crowds until eventually they worked their way up to be headliners. In one performance in Georgia they were supposed to do, remember this is the 1910s and 1920s, people didn't like that Valerie, a black woman, she was a member of the Cabot Sisters, and people did not like that she would be on stage performing. So before the performance even happened the night before, the townspeople threw a brick through the window of the place that the girls were staying at. And on the brick there was a note attached that said, "Go back to the jungle." Outside, there are a whole bunch of Klansmen with a crucifix burning behind them. The next morning, the girls are told their show was canceled, and the person who booked the girls told Buddy to get out of town with those girls right now. Buddy and Alexander were pissed, but the girls refused to kick Valerie out of their group. In the early 1920s, the girls finally made it to New York City, the big time. The girls were booked to perform at a place called the Palace Theater. Now at this point in time, Uncle Buddy got Pepper pregnant. Pepper, who's a member of the band. And they are going to get married because that's just what people did back then when you knocked someone up. It doesn't seem like Pepper is super enthused with the idea, but she feels like she has to go along with it. So the girls, they still performed their big show in New York City, and they gave it their all because they knew this would most likely be Pepper's last show with the group. The girls performed and they absolutely killed it. Everybody loved them. After the show, a rich gentleman wanted to meet the ladies. This man's name was Henry Irving. In real life, Irving is a figure who is widely acknowledged to be one of the inspirations for Count Dracula, the title character of the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker knew Irving and admired him. So this is a subtle hint that this Henry Irving will in fact be a vampire in this story. Henry Irving, he invited the girls to a party he was hosting at his mansion in Long Island. The girls enthusiastically agreed to go. Henry Irving tells the girls, "I'll have a car waiting for you at the stage door. Also gowns at the house for when you arrive." Now Pepper, she stayed with her husband-to-be, But Valerie, Melody, and Josie soon found themselves in a chauffeured Rolls Royce zipping along the parkway, headed out to Long Island to this fancy party. When they arrived at the party, it was one of the fanciest mansions they'd ever been to. Irving's butler led them upstairs to various gowns to try on. The girls performed a little show for Irving's party guests, and after the show, Josie was invited to see Mr. Irving personally afterwards. So she went up to go see him, and she stared into his eyes, and he used some sort of vampire trance to make Josie feel enamored. Josie narrates, "In the moment, I loved everything. The ocean, the night, the breeze, and most of all, his eyes." And Irving tells Josie, "Come to me, Josephine. I want you to see the stars." Josie says, "Oh, they're so beautiful." And Henry continues, "Yes, aren't they? And do you know why? Because in a world where everything is transient, ever-changing, they are eternal. I have an eye for these things, and you, my dear, are a star. I think you deserve to be eternal. So tell me, sweet, sweet Josephine, do you want to be a star? Do you want to live forever?" Josie thought to herself, did I want to be a star? Did I want to live forever? Doesn't everyone? So she answered Henry, "I do, a star, forever." Then Henry tells her, "Then close your eyes, Josephine, and when you open them again, you'll be born anew to the night." Henry carried her into the next room and proceeded to savagely bite into her neck. Josie explains that most movies get it wrong. It's not sexy, not even a little bit. It's a violation, it's bestial. Henry drank her blood and turned her. Eventually, Valerie and Melody found Josie in one of the bedrooms in the mansion, covered in blood. Josie, she just played dumb and said that she didn't know where all the mess came from. And she took a bath and cleaned all the blood off her. And while she was bathing, she noticed that her senses were heightened. She could hear everything for miles around. She put her hand into the sunlight, and she didn't burst into flames. But it did feel like 1,000 needles to her. She says that part of the legend of vampires was wrong. Sunlight wouldn't kill her, but she would have to be careful in it. All three girls went to leave the mansion. Before they left, though, Josie asked the butler where Mr. Irving was. And the butler says, "Oh, he left before dawn. He always leaves before dawn. But he gave me a message for you. You're welcome," he says, "and that he'll see you again." Josie says to the butler, "He said I'm welcome? Do you know what he made me?" And the butler says, "Of course I do. He made you a star. With all due respect, Miss McCoy, you do well to appreciate a gift Mr. Irving's denied so many of us." Josie leaves. The girls ask, "What was that about?" And Josie says, "Nothing, let's go." Valerie says, "Go? Not until you tell us what's happening, Josie. We're your family." And Josie thought to herself, they were that indeed. They were the Cabot sisters, now and forever. Josie saw herself in that moment at a crossroads. She could spare them the truth and be cut off from them forever, an impossible secret between them, or she could share the dark gift with them as they shared everything else in their lives. Josie, she asks them, "Valerie, Melody, I'll tell you everything, but first, I need you to answer a question for me. Do you want to live forever?" The girls agreed, and Josie took them both somewhere dark and bit into them, and the three of them all became vampires. The interviewer doesn't believe this story, and he says, "And I'm supposed to believe you just went back to New York and resumed your lives?" And Josie explains, No, that isn't what happened. Our lives, our daytime lives were over. As far as the world knew, the Cabot sisters had played their last show. Our plan was simple. We would go underground so that time itself would hide us while we regrouped and reinvented. However, first they took a quick stop in Georgia where the Klansmen were mean to them and they feasted on them. Then they re-emerged several years later in World War II as another singing group called the GI Dolls, and they were entertaining the troops, and at night they helped the Allies in other ways, killing Nazi troops in their vampire form. They went underground again and re-emerged in the 50s as the squeaky clean Teen Queens. In the 1960s, to mix it up, Valerie was the lead, and they became the Velvets. The interviewer asks, "Oh, I remember the Velvets, but only vaguely. Sort of a one-hit wonder, weren't they?" And Josie says, "We actually had 3 #1 hits. He's a Rebel, When the Tears Start, and Eddie's Angel. And yes, you would only remember us vaguely. That was our greatest trick, covering our tracks. Easier back then, no internet. And if you were careful about not leaving a paper trail, which we were, you could. Josie then pauses, and she remembers another story from the 1960s. They were going to a party in the hills in Hollywood, and they arrived to a house where Sharon Tate and 4 others were killed, and he'd left a message scrawled in blood. The interviewer interrupts and says, wait. Are we now talking about the Charles Manson murders? And Josie says, "Oh, that's who was blamed, but it wasn't Charlie. All Charlie wanted to do was make records. It was him. It was Henry Irving. Just as we were moving through the world, so too was he, and others he'd created, no doubt." In the 1970s, the girls re-emerged as the queens of disco. In the 80s, that was a difficult time because of the AIDS crisis, all that contaminated blood, all those friends lost. One day, as Jody was leaving Studio 54, she ran into Pepper, the girl who was the 4th member of the Cabot sisters back in the 1920s. She was an old woman now. She was old and exhausted and pale looking and dying. Pepper, seeing Josie, says, I knew it was you." Josie asks her, "Pepper? How are you?" And Pepper replies, "Sick, exhausted, in pain, but you can fix all that, can't you?" She wants Josie to make her a vampire, and Josie says, "That's not how it works, Pepper. You'll be as you are now forever." And Pepper says, "Yeah, but I'll be strong, won't I? And the cancer that's eating my insides, that'll stop killing me, won't it?" And Josie tells Pepper, "You won't die, that's true. But the pain, it won't stop. I'm sorry, Pepper, but trust me, you don't want this life." And Pepper says, "You owe me, Josephine. You left me behind with those monsters. And not once, never once did you come back to check on me. We were supposed to be together forever, and we still can be. You promised, remember? You promised." And Josie says, "I'm sorry, Pepper, but I won't. I just can't help you." Pepper then threatens Josie and says, "Then I'll tell the world what you are. It won't be so easy to hide when everyone knows your dirty animal secret." So Josie had no choice. She made her vanish and devoured her. It was a mercy, really. Anyway, in the 90s, the band, they re-established themselves in the UK, where they became the Sugar and Spice Girls, and they all had bad fake British accents. The less that can be said about the 90s, the better. In the 2000s, they became Twilight's Child. Then in the 2010s, they became Josie and the Pussycats. The interviewer asks, "If you've been guarding these secrets all these years, why are you telling me this story now?" And Josie says, "Oh, the most human of reasons. Selfishness, narcissism. What's the saying? Confessions are good for the soul. Of course, I'm no longer human, nor do I have a soul. Except perhaps when I sing, when we sing. At any rate, it's nice to unburden yourself every couple of decades or so. And it's not like you'll be telling anyone." And the interviewer says, "I won't?" And Josie says, No, you never showed up for this interview, you see. You never went up to my suite, and you never met my sisters." She puts the interviewer in a trance and leads him up to a room with her fellow sisters. And she tells Valerie and Melody, "Ladies, as promised, room service." And the Pussycats devour the interviewer. Later on, we are now catching up to when the beginning of this series first took place. The Pussycats are in their private plane, and it is flying towards Riverdale. The Pussycats are supposed to perform a benefit concert for the people of Riverdale, and the stewardess on the plane interrupts the Pussycats and says, "There seems to be some kind of trouble happening in Riverdale." Before losing contact with air traffic control, the captain heard something about there being mass riots with half the town on fire? Can that really be? The captain says that we could still land at the Riverdale airport, but he recommends strongly we reroute to either Boston or New York. The Pussycats discuss. Riverdale on fire? Rioting in the streets? The Pussycats are intrigued. Josie says, "Tell the captain we're staying on course. Tell him the cats want to land in Riverdale and see what all the fuss is about." Melody asks Josie, "Are you sure? Yeah, you're not worried?" And Josie says, "Why should I be? We Pussycats are stars, don't forget. And the stars are forever." Okay, so that was volume 2. Let me go through what I liked and did not like. So the Sabrina storyline, like I said in my intro, I was a little bit confused about what was going down. It was trippy and weird, although I still thought kind of cool and kind of scary. And seeing Cthulhu was pretty awesome, I gotta say. Cthulhu looks badass. So I'm mixed on it, but there were some things I liked there. The whole Betty diary storyline was okay. I liked seeing Archie and Betty sort of form that relationship, and Archie kind of making a decision, choosing Betty over Veronica was good, and seeing how that drives Veronica mad. The whole side plot with Betty's sister Polly was not very satisfyingly wrapped up. So they sent Polly away to somewhere, but we don't know where, and we don't really know why for sure. Just tell me, man. Just tell me why. And anyway, Cheryl Blossom and her brother, I always liked that dynamic they had. And then we assumed that Cheryl most likely killed her brother. I don't like that we were teased about possible answers and then not given them. And she just told the girls some sort of story, and Archie never found out and we never found out. So that was a little bit disappointing, but whatever, I can roll with it. Reggie's whole side story about him being a sociopath and taking this test, I didn't really love that much, but I did like the ending of that whole storyline there with Reggie telling Kevin that he's going to leave the group and he admits to everything. And then I thought it was cool how Reggie decides to give himself to the zombies, as maybe if he sacrifices himself, the zombies will just go away and give up because they got what they wanted. But instead, he's offered this deal by Sabrina coming back into the story. So I thought that was cool. And Reggie, of course, being a sociopath, takes her up on the deal, and I would have loved to see how that would have played out. Reggie going back to the group, and then Sabrina and Cthulhu tying in with everyone and the zombies. God, I would have loved to see that all wrap up. Sadly, who knows if you will ever get to see that. The last issue, I thought was really fun. Josie and the Pussycats and their sort of different origin, where they were these different bands over the years, I thought was a pretty fun one-shot. So yeah, all in all, I thought this was a pretty good volume. Not as high on it as I was for volume 1, but I still enjoyed it. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Thank you all for watching, and I will be back next week with a brand new horror comic.